So what I'm talking about this morning is I'm talking about motor insurance. I'm talking about mobile and desktop motor insurance. So those are the channels we're talking about this morning. And we're talking about conversion optimization in the UK motor insurance industry. The data that I'm going to be sharing with you this morning is data which has come from studies that we have run at the end of 2016 and the beginning of 2017, and we have run two separate studies, one into desktop and one into mobile. So without further ado, and to get straight into it, what are we talking about this morning? I'm going to be introducing data and insights to you that comes from a program that we have which is called Fruition. In that program, we identify, are you losing target online customers that you should and could be winning? And the concept and premise here is that consumers, when they are searching for a motor insurance provider, will go online, use a search engine in most instances, and a good proportion will go to an aggregator, and some will go to a brand website directly, or through the aggregator they may end up on the brand website. During this consideration process they will look at a number of different brands, but the point is that people are shortlisting you, visiting your site, considering your offers, and then potentially going with a competitor. And at the moment, brands do not have a view of the reasons why someone is visiting, shortlisting, but ultimately choosing somebody else. And this is what we term the lost opportunity score. So that is what we are going to talk about today. Apologies, I'm getting an awful lot of stuff popping up because I popped onto a new computer to get this session going this morning. So what we're going to be talking about is the discover stage first. So this idea of looking for a provider in the marketplace for a prospect who's interested and in market for a motor insurance policy. I'm going to be talking very specifically about Hastings Direct because there's an interesting story in terms of what's happening with Hastings Direct, both across the mobile and the desktop journey. On screen in front of you, you have a funnel. Many of you will be familiar with the concept of funnels, if not all of you. This funnel starts off with unprompted brand awareness. So top of mind, who can you think of? Top 5 providers that are available to you. And then we have an initial preference question, which is of those that you can think of from your top of mind awareness, who would you choose as initial preference? So we can see that Hastings Direct are getting a low market penetration in terms of brand awareness and initial preference, certainly in comparison to the people like Direct Line, Churchill and Admiral, and Aviva and the better known brands in the marketplace. But then an interesting thing happens, which is that 28% of the total sample who are moving through this, which is a quantitative sample size larger than 100 in-market consumers for the mobile study, 28% of them are saying, I would shortlist Hastings Direct. And what happens between initial preference and shortlist is that we set a task for people to go online and to look for a provider. So somewhere during the process of pre-research, who they're thinking of, which is the initial preference, to post-research, going online and having a look at their options, Hastings Direct are intercepting prospects who are looking for a motor insurance policy and getting onto their shortlist and into their consideration set. From shortlist through to final preference, it's really from this repertoire or bucket of options that I have available to me, as in different brands available to me, who am I choosing as my one exclusive final preference option? And we can see that Hastings Direct is coming out at 13%. So basically the key message here is from an initial unprompted brand awareness score of 5%, Hastings are ending up with 13% of the marketplace, which is a very significant achievement. The lost opportunity concept and score of minus 54% is the proportion of people who shortlisted Hastings Direct who went on to choose them at final preference. And this minus 54%, because we are moving from a many options to a single option, the lost opportunity will always be negative. However, what is significant is when we compare it against other brands within the marketplace. And so what we can see here is that Hastings minus 54% in comparison to some of the larger brands like Admiral, Direct Line, Aviva and Churchill is a very positive performance from Hastings Direct. And of the brands on screen, they are definitely scoring the best. So to reiterate, this is specifically looking at the mobile journey at the moment. I will look at the desktop journey in a minute, but from people going online, having a look around, seeing what options are available to them, Hastings Direct are leading and stealing market share. So how do we get the data that we get? I'm going to go through this very briefly. I won't go through it in great detail, and we have videos which are available in terms of our methodology. But in terms of the insights that I'm going to go through in this session, it's important to talk about some of the elements of what creates the data set. We start off by replicating the journey of what a customer will go through when they're looking for a provider. We invite in-market prospects into a study and essentially ask them to complete a number of different tasks. The first task being to explore options on the internet when looking for a particular type of provider. So we will set them a task which is, please find a motor insurance provider. And then we start them off on a blank screen and they can go to any website that they want to go to. We record everything that they're doing as they go through that, so we're picking up the multiple journeys that they're taking, the sequential steps, and the actual specific websites that they're visiting. We then bring them back into the study and we say, okay, we would now like you to shortlist different providers based on the experience that you've just gone through, and we ask them the reasons why they shortlist a particular provider. Then from there we ask them, okay, we would now like you to choose a final preference from the shortlist that you have created and the reasons for the final preference. So we're understanding that funnel, but a key thing that we're doing also is we identify what brands they shortlisted but didn't choose a final preference, and we ask the reasons why essentially you dropped out of the funnel. And so these are the key things which then inform us about what is it that certain brands are not providing that other brands are providing that would help them to win more customers that they're losing. And so then we move to the next stage. So that first stage is very quantitative, with large quantitative samples, a minimum of 200, and we bring them in and ask them questions at a quantitative nature. We then move it into more of a user experience and usability testing type methodology, and we separate the sample out so that people complete tasks on specific websites. The website that they go to, they are not a current customer of, to take research effect out of it. And we then set them a number of tasks when they're going through that website. The first task in motor insurance, for example, may be to find the range or to complete a quote and get a quote for comprehensive car insurance, or we may ask them to go through the claim process. And then we move into the match to needs, which is not everybody starts off looking for a quote. Some people actually go and try and find the policy options that are available, the features and functions of various different policies, and try to find the policy that meets their needs that way. And so we ask them to go through that process of matching to their needs, and in many cases that will involve the comparison tables that are available on the websites. While the consumer is going through this process of completing different tasks, telling us what they think of the journey that they're going through a customer audit, and we're also measuring the effectiveness, the success, the time to complete task, and any problems that they encountered along the way, we are also completing a features and functions audit. The features and functions audit is made up of around 450 different criteria and is weighted in terms of importance during the journey as the person's completing different things on the website. It is Global Review's IP, and it is something that we started off with when Global Reviews launched in 2000 in terms of identifying and measuring best practice features and functions across multiple different websites in multiple different industries. And we have been doing that globally now for 17 years. The features and functions audit is built based on scientific research, as scientific information in terms of backed up by research, as in what are the features and functions that are important to people as they're moving through the journey. So we use these different types of data sets to identify where are the weaknesses on the journeys, and also what are the customers telling us from the discover point of view to tell us where is it that the clients need to focus their attention on in order to reduce these lost opportunities and increase their conversion scores. And so in a nutshell, that is what the methodology is all about. I won't spend too much more time on this. I'll move on to get into the actual insights, which is the reason why we are here. So looking again at the funnels and looking again at multiple brands on the mobile journey in the UK motor insurance marketplace, we can see that there's an interesting thing happening in terms of two specific brands. One of them is Aviva, who are scoring very, very high at the shortlisting in comparison to competitors, and then we have Hastings, who are really bumping up there in terms of final preference, and we saw that earlier on a previous slide. There's all of the different scores of the different brands are in there as well. I'm not going to focus on them too much at the moment, but what is interesting to me is why are Aviva not converting from shortlist through to final preference like Hastings are, and why are Hastings Direct converting? So if I take what are the reasons for shortlisting, so why did you shortlist this particular brand, and you can see that the box that's highlighted in darker grey is that brand is leading against their competitors for this particular element. We can see that the key things that are driving Hastings Direct is really that they are offering great prices and offers, and that the website helps them compare options. So that's an interesting story. So I want to have a look at that in a minute. What is it they're doing from a website point of view? And then also this offers piece, where is it coming from? Where are they getting the message as they go online and look to research? How are they being intercepted, and how is the message being communicated to them? Aviva, really what's coming through in terms of their story is that it's very much down to brand value, brand reputation, and more of the kind of like halo elements from a brand value point of view, which is driving consideration. But getting into the consideration is one thing. Actually getting through the consideration onto final preference, it takes different set of criteria. Because getting into the consideration set is obviously those pieces in and around trust, credibility, and that you will be there for me if I need you. And so once that job is done, we are now down to the bare bones of, okay, we are comparing one product against another, and what is this brand going to do for me that another one isn't going to do? So where is this price thing coming from in terms of Hastings? So I'm going to really look at this very quickly. I mentioned that we have the sequential steps, click streams of how people look around when they're looking on the internet. The thing which is interesting about that is that if you have access to things like Google Analytics, you will have it for your own website. And so that will be based on the penetration that you have in the marketplace in terms of online journeys. So let's say, for example, it's 20%. You have a view of 20% of the marketplace, which means that there is 80% of the marketplace which is blind to you. The reason why what we're doing is very interesting in this area is because we can see the full marketplace. So we can see where everybody's going, the aggregators they're going, and the sequential steps from where they go from one aggregator through to another place. So what's happening in terms of Hastings Direct is that we can see 70% on average are visiting an aggregator at some stage during the journey. Those who are the most popular aggregators being used are Compare the Market and Go Compare. And as we look at those brands that are coming up in an aggregator search, so we have a particular task that we got people to complete, and looking at the results that came through on that task, Hastings Direct have 3 different product tiers, and all 3 of them come up in the top 10 in terms of the top 10 options within the actual aggregator, Compare the Market in this instance. So what's interesting about that is obviously that they are offering 3 different levels in terms of a product strategy, and then the actual grouping together of how far those different products are away from each other makes it easy for a person to scroll up and down in the aggregator and see the differences between the different product sets that Hastings Direct have. So having 3 different product strategy in an aggregator is a good idea as long as a person can easily compare the 3 different products. So if Hastings Direct had one at 3, one at 7, and one at 20, it would be very difficult for the user to actually compare the different products against each other. So that they are grouped together, that they are all within the top 10, makes it very easy for the consumer to understand the differences between the product set. And Hastings Direct, as you go into more detail in the actual product, they use what is not included very well when it comes to the actual details, so that you can clearly see the differences between the product tiers, so you know what you're not getting, not necessarily just what you are getting. So it makes it easier for the actual consumer to compare. And not all of the providers are doing this as well as Hastings Direct. So there's some of the things that Hastings Direct that are doing, which is working very well. But in terms of looking at what the providers are telling us is important to them and works well, what are the reasons for final preference? And this is from mobile and also desktop, and comparing the 2 against each other. That they have the cheapest prices, that they have the best deals and offers for my needs, that their products are easy to understand, they have the best plans for my needs. They are the things which they are doing well on in the aggregator because of their positioning in terms of how they are coming up in the search results, but also the three-tier product strategy. They're showing the different types of features and functions that are available, product features, as you move through the different levels of that product tier. And so that final piece, the extra features they provide, 24 road hour assistance, is clearly available through the Hastings Direct Premier offering. But one of the other things that I'd really like to know is, okay, the website is easy to understand and use, is scoring very well. So how are Hastings Direct doing for this particular element? And getting into the consideration set is one thing, but as they actually then go onto the website to complete the quote and maybe even go through final application or look around for different options, you can still have the pain of abandonment at this stage, even though you have been selected for further information at the aggregator stage. So that's why this consider stage is very, very important, where we now take people onto the website and we have a look at how are the different websites doing. So what we're doing here is we are putting a group of people onto Hastings Direct website and also 4 to 5 other brand websites. The people who are on the Hastings Direct website are different to the people who are on the Churchill website, different to the people who are on the Admiral website. So what we are doing is we are doing a like-for-like comparison and we are benchmarking. And at this point we have taken price out of the equation. So how do Hastings Direct do at all of the different stages within Consider? So they're doing very well at initial engagement, introducing options, 47%. They're doing well on the quote element, which we're going to look at the moment, but there are some other things in here in terms of the introducing options that they're not doing as well on. But the key thing here is that 13% underneath the 47%, which says they would abandon the website, which is the lowest score out of all of the brands that we benchmarked in this study. We're going to look at First Central in a minute, who came in at 15%, but the bigger brands like the Churchills and the Admirals were coming in with abandonment rates of 33%. Some of the other things which are measured within this consider stage are the evaluating options, so that's matching needs, comparing different product options from one provider, and then also comparing externally against other companies. And then facilitating decisions, we're looking at discoverability, we're looking at self-service in terms of help and support. And now that they have considered their options, how well are we helping them for any questions that they may have? Then we move into channel selection. So the idea being, are we supporting the channel that they're in? It may be through providing discounts for online purchase, or it may be just doing other bits and pieces in terms of security and privacy, considering the purchase that they're about to make and the fact that they're giving bank details. And then finally we go through the apply stage, and in the apply stage then we're looking actually at the forms, but we're also looking at pre-application information and lots of other different things as well. I'm going to focus on the quote for the rest of this session, and so that's the key set, the story I would like to talk to you about this morning. I think I have some interesting things to show you, but we have data on all of the different stages here within the Consider funnel. So if anybody has any questions or would like to get in touch about any of that, then you have our contact details. I'm going to look at 3 brands. I'm going to look at First Central, I'm going to look at Churchill, and I'm going to look at Hastings Direct, and I'm specifically looking at the quote journey. We identified that a website that is easy to use, or a website that helps them compare options, is very important for people when it comes to choosing a final preference brand. So the first thing that's coming out is, having completed the quote tool with Churchill, we can see that people came back to tell us that the period of time that it took them to complete the quote tool was shorter than the period of time it took to complete the quote tool with First Central. So we can see just 13% of Churchill's visitors felt that the process of the quote tool required too many personal details, in comparison to First Central, which is 34%. So a lot of people thought that the First Central quote process was too long. And then other problems that came up with regards to the First Central quote process is that many people thought that there was too much in terms of personal details required to get a quote, and more questions than expected. The Hastings Direct quote tool is less likely to be seen as taking longer to complete, and just 20% found the quote tool took longer than expected. The reasons why I'm pulling out these 3 different brands is because there's an interesting story happening in terms of how these different brands are doing the quote tool, and how consumers are seeing the effort and the perception of the amount of time that it takes to complete the quote tool. Having completed the quote tool, we ask the participants who are doing the task, so that will be between 50 and 20 on each individual website. Now that you've completed this task, what is the next likely thing that you would do in a real environment? And so what we're seeing is that I would look for help and support as the top. I would continue doing research on this website. Is the next score down? I would abandon the task due to frustration and not come back. So Hastings Direct coming in at 13%, First Central coming in at 15%. I would get a quote from another provider but keep this company on my shortlist. And so here we can see then 33% for Admiral, 33% for Churchill, 33% for Swiftcover in terms of the proportion of people who said that they would abandon. If I look at First Central, I can pull out the verbatims of the reasons why the people said the different things that they said and chose the different things that they chose in terms of abandoning, not abandoning, looking for research, or needing help and support. So to draw all of this together, what we have is we have a situation where more people are saying that it's taking them longer to complete the First Central quote process than it is to complete it on Churchill and Hastings Direct. But what we have is we have a higher proportion of people who are abandoning Churchill, and Hastings Direct really are doing a very good job in terms of completing people through the actual task of completing the quote, and people saying that they wouldn't actually abandon. So what is it that Hastings Direct are doing that they're getting more right than the other people in the marketplace? So one of the interesting things to do is to look at an actual diagnostic level, how many different questions are the different providers offering at the actual quote stage. And so what we can see is Churchill are actually offering the fewest amount of questions. So we have 41 questions. First Central are offering 45 and Hastings Direct are offering 47. So the next piece of information that we're discovering is that Hastings Direct's quote tool from a question point of view is actually longer, but they're getting more people to happier or less people saying that they would abandon the actual quote process. So what may be interesting now at this stage is to look at the different types of questions that are actually being asked, and has that got anything to do with how the actual effort is being perceived as they're moving through the quote process. So anecdotal research and research that we have internally here in Global Reviews shows us that when a person comes to completing different types of questions, they can complete a radio button question 2.5 seconds faster than they can a drop-down question, and a free text question takes greater cognitive load or effort than the other two types of questions involved. So what we have developed is a weighting mechanism on the basis of the type of question which is being displayed within the actual form. And so when we go through the forms and we look at all of the different question types that are being asked, we can then grade or weight the overall quote form in terms of its overall effort. So what we can see here is that the number of drop-downs that are on each of the individual different providers, the radio buttons that are involved, and the free text entry questions, we can see that First Central have a greater proportion of free text entry questions and a fewer proportion against the overall number of questions that they have of radio button questions, and this is giving them a weighted value which is lower, which is negative, than their competitors. So then we move on to the next stage, which is, okay, from an effort point of view, First Central's effort is greater because of the question types that they're using. There's another thing which is very important, which is order effect. So where are those question types? If we started off a quote tool with loads of free text questions, we're really going to put somebody off. So where we actually put those questions is very, very important. So we look at all of the different question types against the actual order within the actual quote tool, and we can see that there is something interesting going on. What we can see is that First Central are putting most of their radio button questions towards the end of the quote tool, whereas Hastings Direct are peppering them through the quote tool. So that makes it easier for a person as they're going through to actually complete it, because they have these easier questions to complete as they're moving through the process. So that's very interesting. So moving on to the next area, how are Hastings Direct actually doing this? And one of the things that they are doing is that they have changed the order in comparison to their competitors of when different question types actually come up. So for example, if these are questions across both First Central and Hastings Direct, which would be common across many of the motor insurance quote forms. So for example, the email address question. Hastings Direct have that at the 48th question in comparison to First Central at the 21st question. So what Hastings Direct have actually done is they've looked at the contextualization of the quote form and decided, you know what, this idea of this is all your car details, this is the details about you, this is then extra details about, let's say, your driving history. They haven't done it contextually on the basis of what the relevance of the different sections are. It's more down to the actual understanding of the question types and how easy would it be to use those question types to move people through the form. So the idea being that there's two ways in which you can group your questions, and by changing the definitions of those groupings, you really have much more flexibility to design a form which is easier to complete. And so that is what Hastings Direct have done. What other things have they done? How they've rendered the questions is interesting as well. They've used user-friendly language to encourage completion as they're moving through the actual quote tomb. There are lots of best practice stuff in terms of inline labels, which assist alongside labels to assist completion. Just pulling out something that they're not doing correctly, which is that when you're putting in a numerical value, the keyboard that comes up is not correct. It's the QWERTY keyboard, and it should actually be the numerical keyboard. So as you're going through the scroller to choose the different types of options that are available to you, it seems very simple, but they actually have a label, select your title, at the top. And many providers don't actually have this. And we're going to look at an example in a minute where there's none at all. So other things that they're doing which are a bit different. So what do you do for a living? They have the ability to show all, which means that the prospect can actually scroll through all of the different options that are available rather than just having to rely on the type in text box. We're all familiar with the concept of fat fingers when it comes to people using mobile, and so this just offers a different layer of navigation. So pre-filling as well which is very common across all of the motor insurance sites. When it comes to the selector on the postcode, they're pulling up on the scroll the full address, which actually helps when the person is checking whether the address that they're putting in is correct. So some instances, motor insurance providers are put in your postcode, and then it will bring up 4 different fields, text entry fields, pre-populated, with your address in there, and almost you have to look at them to make sure that that is exactly your address, and then you can move on. But the pre-population and the appearance of these 4 extra forms actually is jarring because the navigational element has changed a little bit, and the person who's completing the journey all of a sudden has 4 things pop up in them, and the form has just gotten longer. It's unexpected. Whereas what Hastings Direct are doing here is they're actually allowing you to do the confirmation of the address within the actual scroller, which just makes the navigation just that little bit easier. And then the 4 boxes appear above the postcode, and you are pushed further down the form. If you do want to go up to check them, you can scroll upwards. Error correction is appropriate to the question being asked, and they have simple checkbox already displayed at the very, very bottom of the form in terms of how you want to get in touch. So how do we know that this is actually all of this stuff that Hastings Direct is having a positive impact? Because when we look at the judging the experience, which is a question where we ask the providers who are participating in the research on the site, considering the research that you've just completed, how likely is it that you would choose to purchase from this particular provider? We can see that Hastings Direct are scoring up there against their competitors. And then the customer effort score, which some of you may be familiar with, which is a very well-known industry metric for measuring usability, they are scoring better than any of their competitors. So the idea being that the higher the score, the more negative it is, and the closer to 0 you are, because that means that there is less effort required. And so we can see that Hastings Direct correlate on both of those scores. And with the abandonment, the lowest abandonment score after the quote tool, it really is indicating to us that Hastings Direct are doing a lot of good stuff at the quote stage. So we have that piece at the discover stage that we now know they are bringing people successfully into the funnel. They also have that piece in and around the quote stage, so we know what they're doing in terms of being able to convert people through. So they really are joining the dots as it moves through. We're talking about First Central, so I just want to pull up some of the examples of the kind of things then that aren't working, and that may be causing that extra frustration in terms of people feeling that the form is a little bit longer. So you can see that label coming up in terms of the scroller for the salutation. There's no label on the First Central Quote tool. We can see that the error response, when you're trying to complete a field, it doesn't automatically bring you to the field where there is an error, which would be best practice. We can see inline labeling in some instances could be stronger. And the language, domestic miles, whereas in Hastings Direct we saw roughly how many miles, so very, very user-friendly language. And then the final buttons in terms of moving through the navigation really should communicate the benefit of what is going to happen next. So if they're at the end of the form and the button is next, it really should be get a quote. Okay, and so moving on to a different industry and an example from somebody else, what we can see from Energy Australia is that they're doing an awful lot of great stuff when it comes to the form, providing help and support as you're moving through the form. So we have pop-ups that come up towards the bottom of the form as you're scrolling through. It already sits in the footer, and then if you click on that, then it brings up multiple different ways in which you can get in touch. And then there's FAQs that are in there are contextual to the actual form that you're completing rather than just generic FAQs, and so they really are doing an awful lot in terms of helping the person as they're moving through it. So across our studies globally, this would be a best practice example of somebody who's doing some very good stuff within form design. Okay, so and some of the other things that they're doing then as well, so ability to email a quote to yourself, communicating the process moving forward is good for first impressions, positive reinforcement all the way through, and then reducing the likelihood for abandonment by reducing uncertainty, so the way in which they're using the day, month and year when it comes to actually putting in the date of birth. So there's obviously many different ways in which you can do this, and this one in particular is testing well for us. So moving on then to the next stage, looking very quickly at the desktop side of things, and I really only have a few slides left, so because I realize I'm running a little over because we started a little late. So looking at Churchill, and now I'm looking at the desktop and I'm comparing Churchill against First Central, and they're doing a lot of good stuff when it comes to, on the desktop side, the results coming out, there is less likelihood to abandon, and again, people seeing that the number of questions when you're completing the Churchill journey on desktop is fewer than it is on mobile. So the message that I'm really seeing is this, across both desktop and mobile, there's a challenge for First Central in and around this quote task. So what is it that Churchill are doing then on the desktop side? So their process in terms of the progress bar is very clear, and the actual naming, small stuff like the stage that I'm at on the progress bar has the same label as the stage at the top of the actual page. So you can see there your details adds up to your details. They clearly show me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of the different elements that are going to be included in your detail. And so they are feeding forward expectations, so I know how long this is actually going to take. Retrieve a quote is available within the actual quote, and then also access to FAQs and secure payment information with telephone numbers. So that pops up as an overlay on the actual page, and general inquiries, I can make a telephone call. They feed forward information, icon displays within the quote journey, so that helps in terms of if I have any questions. So a usual one which comes up in terms of motor insurance is asking a question about why you are a homeowner. Why are we asking them if they're a homeowner? Is it because we want to sell them home insurance? And should we be upfront in terms of the reasons why we are asking them if they're a homeowner? This is something that a lot of motor insurance companies don't do, but across all of our studies, consumers want transparency and they want easily understood details and questions so that they know the reasons why they're being asked what they're being asked. Things like mileage calculators in banking, this is something then that's very popular in terms of different types of calculators for mortgages and loans and things like that. And so Churchill, a good example of mileage calculators and how they're implemented within the actual quote tool. And looking again, Australia, but this time Motor Insurance Australia and RAA, what they are doing is an individual question per page as you're moving through, and there is no progress bar. And so there are multiple different ways in which you can move a person through the actual journey, and is it catastrophic to remove a progress bar from a quote tool? Well, RIA have managed to do it, and they're getting very, very good scores from our studies in terms of how people feel about it when they're moving through the actual tool, and then also the number of people who are able to effectively complete the task. So the proportion of people who said that they were a problem when they completed this task is very, very low. So although there are 8 steps, a little more if multiple drivers added, questions are broken into small sections. Most questions are dropped down a radio bar with 2 options, each allowing customers to go through the questions easily with a feeling of speed. Most claimed that they didn't encounter a problem during the process. So I have 3 conclusions. Getting into the consideration set in many cases means representation on the aggregator, which you will know. I'm preaching to converted here. Consider the aggregator strategy, and in particular placement on 2 different aggregators. We know that people are using more than one aggregator. And so if they go to one aggregator and they get a different result on another aggregator, not only in terms of positioning but also in terms of promotions, that is something that needs to be looked at, because it's important, because their expectation is that they're going to get the same thing across the 2. Order effect of questions in the quote form and also changing the question type to include more radio buttons could have a significant impact on effort. And then reducing effort can increase perceptions of a faster time to complete. This is key for driving a positive experience on site. So hopefully some of the things that we've gone through this morning you've found interesting and insightful. You have our contact details if you have any questions, and we will be able to share a recording and also the slides. And if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat box. I'll mute myself for a minute and then answer any questions that people might have. Okay, 2 quick questions there. The first one is, where do we get our sample from? And so the answer to that is that we work with the largest panel providers around the world, Research Now, SSI, Toluna, and we recruit sample working with them, so they're panel partners, and we have international partnership agreements with them, and we recruit sample as in market. So those are people who are looking to buy a product in that industry within the next 90 days. The second question is, what industries are we operating in? And so we are in multiple different industries in different territories. So we have data across APAC and then also UK and Europe. We operate in most of the insurance sectors, so health insurance, life insurance, home insurance, and obviously motor insurance. In banking sector would be a big sector for us as well. Credit cards, home loans, personal loans, and lots of other stuff as well. Transaction accounts or current accounts here in the UK. And then we're also covering pensions, superannuation, higher learning in Australia, and energy would be a very important sector for us as well. So we pull best practice from all of these different sectors and feed those best practice elements into our insights when we are showing to clients ways in which they can improve the journey and therefore increase conversions and reduce abandonment. So hopefully you found it insightful. Thank you very much again for coming along, and apologies for the delay in getting us started. Thank you very much.